Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And for this week, we're going to go back to 1987 to take a look at what I believe is probably the second greatest compilation album of all time. The Smiths' classic, Louder Than Bombs. Of course, this album was released on March 30th, 1987. Just several months before the band would sadly release its final studio album ever, Strange Ways Here We Come, in September of that year. Now, for whatever it's worth to you, I always sort of take these things with a grain of salt whenever these mainstream publications come up with these sort of lists. But according to Rolling Stone, Louder Than Bombs ranks at number 369 out of their 500 greatest albums of all time. Recently, actually, Apple Music just released their 100 greatest albums of all time, and people all over the world seem to be pissing their pants over it. The Smiths did register at number 66 with what is inarguably, in my opinion, their greatest album of all time, The Queen is Dead. Like I said, sometimes with these lists, you sort of have to just sort of accept it for what it is. According to Apple Music, anyway, recently, the greatest album of all time is The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Now, I'm not really here to comment on that. That is an artist and an album that I know very little about. I doubt that I've even heard the entire album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. It may or may not be the greatest album of all time. Congratulations to Lauryn Hill, however. But I doubt very much that it is even as good as Louder Than Bombs. And I know for a fact, having never even really heard it, that it is not as good as The Queen is Dead, son. For me, Louder Than Bombs was probably the second Smiths album I ever bought. I think I've told you on this channel before, I joined the cult of Morrissey in the spring of 1994 on a class field trip when one of my classmates loaned me a copy of Morrissey's solo album and my favorite compilation album of all time, favorite record in the world, Bone and Drag. And pretty much immediately after that, I began, snatching up all of Morrissey's solo material, at least that was all of that was available in 1994. And it was funny because back in those days, I sort of made this conscious decision that I was going to sort of cut off my Morrissey collecting at the solo material. For some reason at the time, I felt as if I wasn't necessarily interested in the Smiths. I didn't think it could possibly be as good as Morrissey's solo material. And if I'm being completely transparent, Morrissey at the time was definitely not my favorite recording artist of all time. This is right as I was sort of entering into my Billy Idol / Generation X phase, which would occupy my brain for the next at least several years, I would say. But I do remember when I first decided that I was going to buy a Smiths album after I had collected all of the Morrissey records that had been released up to that point. The first Smiths record I ever bought was Hatful of Hollow, and the reason why I bought Hatful of Hollow, as my first Smiths album is probably the most generic reason of all. That being that it had the song How Soon Is Now, and I decided that I wanted the song How Soon Is Now. And upon listening to the rest of Hatful of Hollow, I was completely hooked on the Smiths as well, and made the conscious decision that I was going to sort of dive headfirst into the deep end of the Smiths swimming pool as well. And I remember the reason why I bought Louder Than Bombs as my second Smiths album in terms of my personal collection was one day I was at my local record store, and I believe I was sort of debating between two different CDs, one of which I could probably afford. Now, back in those days, I was a student, and I was working in a fast food restaurant flipping burgers. And I remember that the album Louder Than Bombs had probably twice as many songs as the other album that I was considering, and it was only like $1 or $2 more. So what it really came down to, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, is it really sort of came down to a question of economics. And I took this home Took this record home, listened to it, and of course, it has been one of my favorite records pretty much ever since. I mean, even the most devout Morrissey and Smith's haters would have to concede that Louder Than Bombs is a pretty exquisite collection of tunage. I mean, maybe not. I mean, I've met people that really don't like Morrissey and the Smiths. In fact, I do believe I've met people that say that Morrissey and the Smiths are their most hated band of all time. I mean, can you imagine? I guess I could. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that still like Sammy Hagar. I mean, we've seen that Motley Crue over the past couple summers are as popular now as they've ever been. I mean, Dream Theater. I assume there are people that still love Dokken. All of which pale, however, compared to the worst band of all time. That being the Boston Bad Boys of Aerosmith. They are the worst band of all time. If somebody put a compilation album in front of me of the 24 greatest songs by Aerosmith, and I put the term greatest in exaggerated air quotes, I don't think that I would describe it as being an exquisite collection of tunage. So I suppose if, somebody who was devoutly anti-Smiths and Morrissey, I guess I could see how they wouldn't necessarily want to, concede that this is one of the greatest albums of all time. Like I said, this, in my opinion, is the second greatest compilation record of all time, behind only Bone of Drag, which is my all-time favorite album. Of course, this record features the sort of traditional classic Smiths aesthetic. This album cover was designed by Morrissey. It features playwright Sheila Delaney, somebody that I honestly don't know a ton about. She is sort of featured throughout this record a few times. This is a picture of Sheila Delaney taken at the age of 19. This photograph originally ran in the Saturday Evening Post. And like I said, she is sort of referenced a few times throughout this album. The first song on this album is a song called Is It Really So Strange? Recorded on the John Peel sessions in 1986. This is a great live version of this song. This is sort of, a great sort of classic kind of breakup song. Honestly, this is kind of like the 1980s equivalent to me of sort of listening to like an old heartbroken Hank Williams song. I remember that was sort of, back in my younger years, that was sort of one of my routines whenever I would go through a relationship that sort of failed, was I would sit around and I would listen to old Hank Williams records. Somebody that I'm still a huge fan of to this day, but it was something that was just, it became this sort of tradition with me. Sadly, I've gone through several breakups. But this, I think, is every bit as good a breakup song as anything by Hank Williams. And of course, this version of it was recorded live for John Peel. And again, it proves something I've always said about the Smiths. Not only are they the greatest band of all time, but they are obviously one of the greatest live bands in the history of rock and roll, if not the greatest. The second song on this record is a song called Sheila Take a Bow, in reference to Sheila Delaney and her film Touch of Honey. Now, again, in the spirit of complete transparency, I've never seen the film Touch of Honey. I realize that makes me a bad Smiths fan. Apparently, this song is about a pregnant teenager and the gay man that she is in love with. The relationship dissolves due to social pressure, mostly by the girl's young mother. I love the song Sheila Take a Bow. It is as iconic a Smith song as there is in the entire catalog. The next song after that is Shoplifters of the World Unite. Another one of the greatest songs in the history of this band's catalog, one of their more signature songs. To me, this song, or not to me, I've read that this song is not about, the act of physically shoplifting. This is not about going into sort of grocery store and shoving a loaf of bread into your jacket. This song is more about the idea of sort of intellectual shoplifting, plagiarism, if you will, stealing the ideas of others and passing them off as yourselves, as your own. Of course, famously, this single features a young and pretty awesome picture of Elvis Presley. Somebody that you could make the argument. Now, I'm a huge Elvis fan, and I make no bones about it. I am totally unapologetic and unashamed of that fact, as ashamed as I am of most things in my life. I'm not ashamed of being an Elvis fan, but you could make the argument that Elvis probably is one of the greatest perpetrators, at least in the history of entertainment, of intellectual shoplifting, because the guy became the most successful, entertainer of all time based on the work and the writings and the music of other people. Basically, what he did was he took other people's music, and yes, he interpreted and made it his own and put his own twist on it. I don't think anybody would ever argue with that, but basically, he is, I think, the greatest culprit in the history of rock and roll when it comes to, intellectual shoplifting. And I'm a huge fan, as I know Morrissey is a huge Elvis fan as well. Actually, if you want to see something interesting in regards to shoplifters of the world, if you haven't seen this, which I'm not assuming that you haven't, but if you haven't seen the film Shoplifters of the World, it's something that I would highly recommend. I was actually planning on doing an entire episode on this film at some point in time, but I can give you the cliff notes right now and say that this is a film that is a Smiths-based sort of coming-of-age movie. It takes place sort of surrounding the James Best saga, one of the most sort of famous and interesting pieces of Smiths folklore, I think. Of course, in 1988, James Best was the Smiths fan who planned on breaking into a radio station in Denver, forcing the disc jockeys to play nothing but Smiths songs. Now, in real life, James Best didn't actually make it inside of the building. He made it as far as the parking lot before he turned himself into authorities. And in real life, the incident with James Best happened months after the band broke up. Of course, it all sort of began because he was, verklempt over the breakup of the band, the Smiths. Now, in the film, Shoplifters of the World, all of this happens the same day that the band breaks up, which is, again, historically inaccurate. This film, as entertaining as it is, and I think it's a decent film. It's not Oscar material or anything. It does take some liberties, and there's definitely a lot of historical inaccuracies, such as in this film, the perpetrator who breaks into the radio station. First off, he does it the day the band breaks up, whereas in real life, James Best planned on breaking into the radio station months after the band had broken up. And in this film, he actually gets into the radio station where he interrupts a heavy metal broadcast, and he and this sort of Hesher disc jockey, part of the film, there's a lot of different sort of subplots that go on throughout this movie, but one of the big subplots is this Smiths fan and this sort of heavy metal headbanger DJ, their conversation as he's holding the radio station hostage, and how they eventually learn to sort of understand one another and become friends. It's a little bit corn, it's a little bit cheese, but it is a pretty interesting movie. It is a Smiths-themed coming-of-age film, and the entire soundtrack is Smiths tunage, so who can argue with that? But if you haven't seen the film Shoplifters of the World, and you know much about the whole James Kiss, I think I said James Best earlier, who was Roscoe P. Coltrane on Dukes of Hazzard. If I said James Best, it's actually James Kiss. Actually, one thing I will say that they did in this film that was kind of cool was in sort of, I don't want to say to honor James Kiss, but in order to sort of reference him, the radio station in this film that the guy breaks into is called Kiss FM, after James Kiss. And of course, he breaks in on a heavy metal show, so there's an opportunity there to sort of throw up all this sort of Kiss and Gene Simmons memorabilia as well. Anyway, I love the song Shoplifters of the World. To me, it's one of the most iconic Smiths songs of all time. The next song is Sweet and Tender Hooligan. This one was also recorded live for John Peel in 1986. Such an incredible version of this song. Just epic screaming guitars. Such a great vocal performance by Morrissey. And again, it proves to me that they are one of the best live bands of all time. The next song is Half a Person, one of my favorite Smith songs of all. One of my favorite songs just of all time, period. To me, this song represents sort of me when I was 16, awkward, clumsy, and shy. It still sort of represents who I am now, even though I'm 30 years past the age of 16 at this point in my life. Recently, Morrissey, when he came down here to Nashville and Memphis for the 2023 40th anniversary tour, this was one of the songs he played both nights. And this is a song I just never get tired of, ever. And every time I get a chance to see Morrissey, this is one of those songs that I just always hope is in the playlist, the set list. And he killed it both nights down here in Tennessee. The next song after that is a song called London. This is a song I think about somebody leaving the North and moving down into London. And that sort of ability to kind of just relocate and leave everything behind and sort of being unafraid of making a fresh start. This is something that I can relate to tremendously in my life. I have spent most of my adult life moving around every several years. I've lived, I believe, in 7 different states around the United States. And although it's never an easy decision to pick up and move and leave your friends and your job and other things behind, it's something that I'm also not very afraid of. And when I talk to people that are considering making their first big move, I sort of tend to encourage it, because I always think that, hey, really, the worst thing that can happen really isn't that bad. And if you don't like where you end up, or you don't like where you land for a while, the freeway goes in multiple directions. You can come back home, you can go somewhere else. And I've always had a pretty decent experience moving around. It's not something that I want to do forever. People always ask me why I move around as much as I have. And I always sort of make the joke, although I wonder sometimes how much of a joke it is, that, I'm just trying to run away from myself, and everywhere I go, I just end up showing up, and it drives me crazy. I make my own flesh crawl. I love the song London. It is, again, I think it's just, it's such a perfect, great Smith song. There really isn't much on this record at all that is anything less than almost perfect. The next song after that is a song called Panic. Now, this song has one of my favorite sort of backstories in the Smiths catalog, that being that Morrissey and Johnny Marr wrote this song after listening to a radio broadcast about the Chernobyl disaster. And immediately following this news break where they were talking about the horror of Chernobyl, the disc jockey comes back on and they break right into a song by Wham called I'm Your Man. And Morrissey and Marr both looked at each other and could not believe how absolutely ridiculous this was. Now, I would make the argument that listening to Wham under any circumstance is ridiculous. I can see no rationale for ever listening to Wham or George Michael, for that matter. It reminds me of an incident that I remember listening to on the radio when I was living back in the Bay Area back in the mid-1990s. I was a baker. And I had to be at work at 2 in the morning. And basically what I would do is I would get there, and we had a radio in the back where the bakers worked. And sometimes I would just put on CDs or tapes if I didn't want to listen to the radio. Or occasionally I would put on the local radio station in San Francisco, the alternative radio station in San Francisco, which was called Live 105. I think it still is, actually. And I remember one early morning, I was working, and a news break came over the alternative radio station announcing that INXS singer Michael Hutchence had passed away via suicide. And it was a somber moment. Now, I'm not a big INXS fan, and I never really have been, but, they talked for a few minutes about INXS and their contribution and the fact that he had passed away, and it was suicide. And they said, we're going to play you a song now by INXS, dedicate this to Michael Hutchence. And the song they played was Suicide Blonde. Now, I don't know even what that song's about. I don't even know if it's really about suicide. But I thought it was a sort of a distasteful move to announce that Michael Hutchence had just committed suicide and then play the song Suicide Blonde in his honor. That's the only thing that I can sort of relate to in terms of this. Now, obviously, Michael Hutchence dying, I'm sorry, as big an INXS fan as some people are, I think even they would acknowledge that Michael Hutchence passing doesn't quite rank up there with Chernobyl, but that's just my opinion. The next song after that is a song called Girl Afraid, another song that I absolutely love. This is a song about a girl that is so worried about what the boy she fancies thinks about her that she has sort of a tendency to come off as a little bit cold and indifferent. Now, when my wife and I first met, we were working together at a place in Santa Cruz because her and I basically do the same thing for a living. Now, we don't work together all the time, although we have, and we've managed it pretty well. And for many, many months, I worked there before my wife started. And for many, many months, I thought that my wife wasn't just disinterested or indifferent, should I say. I thought that she actively hated me. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that hating me isn't the most difficult thing in the world, but I genuinely thought that she hated me. I would try to engage her in conversation. I have this sort of weird sense of humor. I have kind of an old man sense of humor. I tend to make jokes that old people think are funny. I always think are funny, but she does not think they're funny, typically. And back in those days, before she really knew me, she especially didn't think they were funny. So I would purposely make jokes to her, thinking that she hated me anyway, and knowing that she did not think I was funny, that were purposely bad. I mean, I saved my A material for this, but I've got some material that's sitting on the bench, if you know what I mean. But it came out, one of our other coworkers came up to me, and of course this sounds very like high school, but one of my coworkers came to me and she told me, she said, "Hey, I think that Marina likes you." And I sort of scoffed. One, because I don't ever think that girls like me. And two, her in particular, she was just so sort of standoffish and cold and indifferent. I told her, I think you're nuts, honestly. She doesn't even like me as a human being. Well, it came out a few months later that she did. And she's always told me that this is basically why she was acting the way that she was acting, because she was so worried about what I felt about her, and she was sort of uncomfortable with her feelings about me, that it just sort of came across as being how it came across, which was not very pleasant, I must have to tell you. I really love this song. The next song after that is Shakespeare's Sister. Another song I like. This isn't necessarily the highest point on the album, at least in my opinion. Morrissey himself has described this song as being about shrugging off the shackles of depression and the skins of one's parents, getting out there and sort of living the life you want and doing as if you wish. I really like that sort of message. I sort of like when people kind of shuck, society's norms. I like when people kind of live for themselves and they don't sort of are as worried about the expectations of others. I mean, you don't necessarily have to go out and get married. You don't necessarily have to go out and have kids and have the picket fence in the suburbs. You can go out and you can do whatever you want. You can chase your dreams. You can pursue your passion. You can move around if you want. I really like that sort of messaging. The next song after that is a song called William, It Was Really Nothing. Morrissey himself has also said that this is a song about a young man that is trying to persuade his best friend not to make the mistake of getting married. Now, Morrissey's opinions on marriage are sort of well documented. I really like this song. I was always sort of drawn to the lyric, the rain falls hard in a humdrum town. It kind of reminds me of the town that I grew up in. A town that I've talked about, I don't want to sit here and just bash every week, but a town where I felt as if I was an outcast and sort of thrown away by my classmates and my peers, but a place that at the end of the day, I knew I wasn't really planning on staying in, so the opinions of those who resided there didn't necessarily mean as much to me as perhaps other people, that I sort of grew up around. I was always fortunate. I always felt fortunate in the sense that by middle school, because the town I grew up in was a place where the kids that were best friends on the first day of kindergarten were the same people that were friends the last day of 12th grade. Those cliques were in place, and they were pretty much padlocked. So by middle school, I kind of just accepted my fate. So honestly, in some ways, high school was less painful than it could have been because I didn't go into high school with a lot of expectations that I was suddenly going to become like the big man on campus. The next song after that is You Just Haven't Earned It Yet. Another song I really love. This song I feel like is pretty self-explanatory. You know, if you're sitting around pining for love and happiness, feeling as if you deserve it, but it has not been, placed upon you, I think the song is basically saying, you haven't earned it yet. Maybe you have to do a little bit more suffering. Maybe you have to do a little bit more self-work. The next song after that is Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now. Of course, one of my favorite Morrissey lyrics of all time is I was happy in the haze of a drunken hour. Something that I can definitely relate to. To me, this is one of my favorite Smith songs of all time. I also love the idea or the concept in the lyrics where he talks about being nice to people and smiling at people who you'd much rather kick in the eye. Now, I'm not going to walk around kicking people in the eyes, nor do I assume that Morrissey is going to walk around kicking people in the eyes, but it does make me think of what I do for a living. I have a job where I work with the public, and anytime you work with the public, it can be unpredictable, it can be thankless, it can be soul-sucking, and right now in particular, the public that I work with is a very affluent, very entitled, very powdered ass, type of clientele. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of opinions, they have a lot of very high opinions about themselves, and quite frankly, at the risk of sounding overly dramatic myself, they can be downright abusive, at least in my opinion. It's funny that these people who fancy themselves as being like these like Christian-y Trumpers can be downright abusive. I know it's hard to imagine a Trump fan being abusive, isn't it? But it's my job to go there and put on a face and provide them with the service that I am paid to provide them. Always being consistent, never showing as if I am having a bad day, never showing as if, I am not in the mood to put up with their nonsensical bullshit. It's my job to stand there and be consistent and do what I do. And I'm pretty good at it, I have to tell you. I don't throw compliments around at myself all the time, but I am pretty good at it. Most people that I work with and around, I'm always the same person. I'm the quiet guy who never talks generally, but I'm always consistent. You never see me having some dramatic meltdown or, coming in to work having a bad day, slamming my lockers, things like that. I'm not that guy. The next song after that is a song called Ask. I really like this song a lot. It sort of reminds me of the song Girl Afraid. Kind of a girl that is a little bit too, or somebody, doesn't necessarily have to be a girl, somebody that is, sort of afraid to let somebody know how they feel. This is another song that is one of my favorites in the Smiths catalog. I was just thinking about this the other day. I don't know that, because I've been listening to this record a lot over the past couple weeks. I don't know that I've seen the song Ask live. I don't know. I'll have to go back and check my set list because I have them written down somewhere. But the next song after that is Golden Lights. I think one of the most interesting songs on this record. I love this song, by the way. One of the most interesting songs on this record because, one, it's a cover. Of course, it's a cover by a singer named Twinkle Ripley. This is a song about how fame changes people. And it's interesting because what I think is interesting about this song as far as on this record goes, one, is because it is a cover. And two, because as devout and loyal as most Morrissey and Smiths fans are, and I think that we are as devout as any fan base in rock and roll. I've always said that. I will always die on that hill. This is a song that a lot of Morrissey and Smiths fans generally just genuinely hate. And that being said, That's another thing that I kind of respect about Smiths and Morrissey fans is we do have brains in our heads, despite how inarticulate I sound most of the time. We do have brains in our heads. We are capable of critical thought. And unlike some other, diehard musical fan bases, I think that most Smiths fans are willing to admit when either Morrissey solo or the Smiths have sort of struck out on a song. And this is a song that I actually really like a lot. But this is a song that I would say is probably one of the most disliked by the sort of general population out there in the Morrissey Smiths fandom. I mean, I talked to somebody one time who was a Smiths fan, and they said that this was one of the worst songs of all time. No. There are 3 songs that I would put in the running as the worst song of all time. Number 3 would be I Can't Drive 55 by Sammy Hagar. Number 2 would be Honky Tonk Badonkadonk, a real crowd pleaser down here in Nashville by Trace Adkins. And number 1, the worst song of all time, is Love in an Elevator by Aerosmith. I don't see Golden Lights anywhere on that list, do you? I actually really like this song. It is a very unique Smith song, and I actually like the Twinkle Ripley song version of this song as well. I mean, this isn't even the worst song in Morrissey's catalog. I mean, the worst song in Morrissey's catalog is Dear God, Please Help Me off of Ringleader of the Tormentors. Or maybe Truth About Ruth. I mean, this isn't even the worst Smith song, son. I mean, to me, Miserable Lie isn't that snug. I would take this song over Miserable Lie every day. I actually like the song Golden Lights. The next song after that is the instrumental Oscillate Wildly. Apparently, according to what I've read, Johnny Marr approached Morrissey the way he often did with songs back in those days, a instrumental track that was written, asking for Morrissey to add his lyrics to it. Supposedly, Morrissey liked the track as it was, and it was left alone as an instrumental. I don't hate it. I think it'd be cool if it had some lyrics and some Morrissey vocals over the top of it, but I like it. It fits this record. It's just kind of a, not that it's, a throw-in, but it's a compilation. It's just something you kind of put on it. I don't think it takes away anything from the record. I don't know that it adds a ton to the record, but I don't think it's bad. The next song after that is a song called These Things Take Time. One of the things about Morrissey's fans that I sometimes disagree with is when Morrissey's fans overinterpret every song of his as being somehow homosexual or gay in nature. Now, Morrissey may or not be gay. I tend to think that he is, and it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. It would not change how I feel at all. I'm no bigot, son. And I know you're not really supposed to say that because it's June, and right now it's the media's job to sort of, shove the pride flag so far down our throats that we all fart rainbows. That's one thing I love about June. I love all these media companies and these corporations that tend to have a conscience with the rainbow flags. And people just buy into it too. Oh my God, look at that! It's so cool. They're supporting pride. I'm here to tell you that these companies would support child slavery if they thought it could make them a nickel. So don't take it personally. That being said, I do see how this song could sort of be interpreted as being, about a first sort of homosexual encounter. I'm not saying that that's what it is about, but I could see how it is. I've heard people, say that this song is about that, and I'm not necessarily here to disagree with that. The next song after that is another song I love, a song called Rubber Ring. Apparently this song is about your sort of, when you first develop your, a real sincere and intense relationship with music. And music is, apart from my friends and family and marriage and everything else, that's intangible in my life, music has always been the most important thing in my life. My record collection, going to see shows. I mean, when I was a kid, music really saved my life. Like I just talked about earlier, I grew up as a kid that was sort of an outcast. I had one friend in high school, and he and I both became big music fans at a pretty young age. And music to me was something that, music and comic books, when I was in high school, I was a big comic book fan too. But, you know, I just remember coming home at the end of the day, of school day, and, you know, having a crappy day with my classmates that I didn't like, and they didn't particularly like me. And, you know, you come home and you dive into a comic book and you put on an album, and it provides an escape. It provides something that takes you away from, you know, this world that you're living in. This world of like closed-minded classmates and, you know, teachers who, you know, care who the popular kids in school are and stuff like that. And, you know, my relationship with music now that I'm in my mid-40s is as intense as it's ever been. That's something that I can't imagine ever changing. Some people ask me sometimes, you ever going to outgrow that shit? Your obsession with music and bands? I can't imagine outgrowing it. I can't. I mean, it's so much a part of who I am that I can't imagine it like not being there, honestly. I hope when I get to the other side, I'll just say this, that my records are sitting there nicely waiting for me. I'll say that. Because even on the other side, if I don't have my music and my records, man, I don't want to be there. The next song after that is Back to the Old House. This is a song that I've talked about on this channel before, but it reminds me of a house that I grew up in as a little kid. A place that was not particularly full of happy memories. And whenever I would go back to visit my mom in particular, she'd always be like, hey, you want to go back by the old house? And, you know, you sort of begrudgingly, because you want to be cooperative and you don't want to create problems and you don't want to tell your mom that, no, this house has a lot of bad karma, man. You sort of like begrudgingly accept the fact that you're going to go see the old house. And I remember every time I'd kind of like drive into that neighborhood, I'd sort of start to get like this like feeling in my gut. I just didn't want to see the house. And every time we'd go by the old house, the people who owned it would have made some big dramatic aesthetic change to it. The house never looked the same anytime I drove by it. And it looked nothing like it looked when we lived there. And I would sort of joke in my head that the people that lived in it after we did were making all of these changes sort of trying to somehow exorcise the demons that we left. Thinking to myself, hey man, dysfunction that deep takes more than a coat of paint, son. Now sadly, the entire town that I grew up in burned down in 2018, which I do not celebrate at all. I think it's a terrible, horrible tragedy. The only good thing about that being that the house I grew up in burned down. So, and I never have to go see the old house again. No disrespect to the people that owned it when it burned down. But that's what always makes me think of, hey, you want to drive by the old house? And you're just like, I hate the old house. The next song after that is Hand in Glove. Of course, talked about that song a bunch of times on this record. It is, the Smiths' first ever single. Stretch Out and Wait is another song I really like. I think that this is a song that's basically a sex song. I think it's a song about just kind of knocking boots. Getting ready to lay some lumber, if you will. I like this song a lot. The next song after that is Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want. This song, Morrissey himself said that this song is often misinterpreted as being sad, melancholy, and depressive, when actually it's quite angry. Morrissey himself said that he kept this song deliberately short and concise lyrically to sort of convey that point. The next song after that is This Night Has Opened My Eyes. Another reference to Sheila Delaney and her film Taste of Honey, a film that I have not seen, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. The next song after that is a song called Unlovable. I think this is a song that is on every Smiths fan's top 10 or top 20 songs of all time. Very sort of self-explanatory. My favorite use of this song in terms of at least like pop culture was it was referenced in a film that came out in the mid-1990s called Doom Generation, a film which stars a young Rose McGowan. A film that I love, by the way, still to this day. If you have not seen the film Doom Generation, I would highly recommend it. But there's a scene in the film Doom Generation where they reference the song Unlovable. They talk about how they had this friend who was really obsessed with the Smiths, who ended up committing suicide, and the fact that he had the word unlovable tattooed across his stomach, and every time the song Unlovable would come on, he would just like gush in tears. The final song on this record is another one of my favorites of all time, another probably favorite of all time of a lot of Smiths fans. That being Asleep, fairly self-explanatory if you've heard it. Apparently, the Smiths only played the song live one time back in 1985. I was fortunate enough in 2014 to be in San Jose. Well, let me rephrase that. You're never fortunate to be in San Jose. But in 2014, I was fortunate enough to see Morrissey in San Jose at the San Jose Civic on the World Peace Tour. And he busted out the song Asleep. And I literally almost soiled my trousers, because this was a song that I've never expected to see live. And he executed it. I mean, he absolutely destroyed that song. And just seeing it live was unbelievable. And that show in 2014 at the San Jose Civic on the World Peace Tour, it was a great show. It was a good show. You know, it's always a good show seeing Morrissey. But of all the shows I've been to, my 12, which isn't as many as you've probably been to, but of my 12, it was my least favorite show. And that's a record, World Peace, that I'm still sort of trying to figure out how I feel about it a decade into its life. But, man, seeing Asleep live was pretty snug. That was something I never thought I'd get a chance to see. Real quick before I get out of here this week, of course, big news this week from the Morrissey camp. It was officially announced, and they officially revealed the album artwork for the brand new reissue of the Beethoven Was Deaf live albums. I've pre-ordered my record and CD. And I have to tell you, I am so excited to actually have this record for the first time on vinyl. I never had it before. I've had it on CD forever, but this is one of my favorite live albums of all time. Perhaps one of my favorite. I mean, all of Morrissey's live albums are my favorites for different reasons, but Beethoven Was Deaf because I never got a chance to see that tour. I've always said this, going back and seeing the Smiths live would be one of my top priorities in the Morrissey time machine scenario, apart from Wolverhampton 88, which is number one always. But going back and seeing the Smiths live would be incredible, especially the Queen is Dead tour. Oh my God. But going back and seeing the Your Arsenal tour in 1992 is probably number 2 or 3 for me. I love Beethoven Was Deaf, and the new artwork looks awesome. I absolutely cannot wait to get my grubby mitts on that reissue. Also, Morrissey announced that July 26th and 27th, he's going to be doing 2 celebratory shows in Las Vegas at the House of Blues, which, of course, always, encourages all of the naysayers on social media to keep pumping out the same joke that they've been pumping out basically all of Morrissey's entire career about how he's not going to show up. And it's funny, too, because it's always these guys on social media. The trolls on social media are kind of always the same guy. There was a guy like in his 50s with a goatee who's pushing 4 bills. He ain't gonna show up. That joke's never been said before, has it? Even on social media, people are just a bunch of clones, man. It drives me crazy. But July 26th and 27th, he's going to be in Las Vegas doing 2 celebratory shows to celebrate the reissue of Beethoven Was Deaf. I'm going to try to make it out there to one of them. No promises. Morrissey himself did release a statement, though, this week saying, I will be there, just to let you know, in blood-soaked flesh. I can't wait to see you all. So perhaps he's hearing it a little bit from people regarding, of course, the You Are the Quarry shows back in, January, February in Southern California, which he canceled at the last minute. Not saying that those people that make those jokes are wrong. I'm just saying that those jokes get tired, son. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, Talk to you then.